So basically, this is a rough guide of economic definitions and explanations which you can use for assignment 3 for business environment. What I'm trying to do here is to give you a rough overview which we'll cover in the class, but because we'll cover it so quickly, you might want to recap and review it before you move on. So basic standing point is, what is the economy? What does it do? What's it made up of? Now, a very basic thing is, the economy is the state of a country or region in terms of the production and consumption of goods and services and the supply of money. So basically it's anything which makes anything which is related to money, but any kind of activity which is related to producing money or producing something within a country, but not just producing but also consuming. Now that means basically when you buy something, you are all consumers, you buy things. So for example, when you go to the shop to go and buy a pint of milk, that is an example of how you contribute to the economy. Now there's different types of economics. Now you don't need to know about this in a lot of detail, but it's good to have a basic understanding. This is called micro and macroeconomics. Now micro is small transactions every day, so like buying a loaf of bread or buying a Kit Kat. Nice simple things. A micro transaction can have a big effect. So for example, if everyone downloaded the same soundtrack or the same song, that would have a big effect on the sales of that record eventually, and it could shift things. But it's not usually, these are usually small trends which happen day in, day out. They're not big events. Now macros, when big decisions are made. Now that could be like the government electrifying a railway or building a high-speed rail. In Bristol it's Metrobus. Those are macroeconomics. Those are big decisions which are made. Okay, now business and economic cycle. This is what we would call the business cycle. Now a boom time is when it goes quite sharp and high up. Then you might get a slump, which is when you would go to the top of something, and then you get a recession, and then you get a point of recovery. Now basically what this means is boom is a time of growth when the economy is actually growing at quite a high fast pace. People's wages are going up. A slump and a recession, the difference between the two is, a slump is when you have a complete fall in demand. So you have a complete fall in basically people consuming and buying things, and the economy shrinks quickly. A recession is a longer process where that takes a longer period of time to happen. And a recovery is just that, is where things recover from that point. So you really want to know what actually happens in a time of a recession. Well, businesses usually cut back on production. Some business may go bankrupt. Consumers generally spend less money. There is a fall in the feel-good factor. Individuals lose their jobs. More money is spent by the government on benefits and things like that because more people are out of work. Less money is collected by the government in income tax and VAT, and prices generally start to fall. Now this is what happens in a typical recession. This hasn't happened completely in the past 7 years. To be fair, the recession we've just had has been slightly different, which means a lot of these norms haven't actually happened, and actually the reverse has happened in some occasions. And in growth, businesses produce more goods, business invests more money in machinery, consumers spend more money, and there's a feel-good factor. People feel happier about their jobs, they feel more secure, so you go and spend more money. Less money is spent by the government on unemployment benefits, more money is collected in tax and VAT, prices tend to increase due to extra demand. Now, businesses would like to set, basically this is an example of where a business would want to set up. Country A is quite sharp and it's quite erratic. Country B is actually quite smooth in terms of its growth and what happens. So the top where it says output and the bit about time, basically over a short period of time is going in and out of recession very quickly. Country B is going over a longer period of time. Now a business would really want to be looking at country B. It would want to be in the most stable environment, okay? The more, because basically the more stable an economy is, the more likely it is to succeed. A business does not want to have big peaks and troughs. It wants to be as stable. It wants to be as stable as possible, and it wants to choose an economic environment where it can base itself and set itself up into that. Okay, so that basically gives you a very brief overview of the economic cycle. Moving forwards, what businesses also need to do is they need to look at something called supply and demand. So for this example, and the example that we used in the class, it's looking at something like a Mars bar. It's actually how does a business set its prices. Now you've got a poo here who's looking for 20p, but equally there's another shopkeeper looking for £1. But it's trying to look at how it's set. How does a business set its price? Okay, so we're going to look at how supply and demand is used. The first thing is to actually know what these different things are. Now, demand is the amount of a product customers are prepared to buy at different prices. Supply is the amount of a product businesses are prepared to sell at different prices. The quantity is the amount of something, and equilibrium is basically means balancing point, but that's when supply actually meets demand. Okay, so this is a supply and demand graph. At the side here you have the price, so 20p, 40p, 60p, 80p and £1. At the bottom is the quantity of Mars bars, so going on the same. So you've got 1 Mars bar, 2 Mars bar, 3 Mars bar, 4 Mars bar, 5 Mars bar. And this graph starts at 0 there. Now it has a couple of different arrows, and I'm going to explain step by step what those arrows mean. So how do you show demand? Demand is always shown by going down, and that's this arrow here. D is going down. It's a negative for a business. If you're a business, you want demand to be as high as possible. In terms of the rules of demand, the basic economic rule is this: if the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. If the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. So at the moment, if you had 1 Mars bar at £1, you'd sell. If you sold a Mars bar for £1, you'd only get one person buying it. But if you dropped it to 80p, you get 2 people buying it, and so on. So what about supply? Now supply is like what's up in the title. Supply, it always goes up, okay, and it's always positive. It's basically how much you can produce. Basically, it states that at higher prices, producers are willing to offer more products for sale than at lower prices. So that basically means in English, you are not going to sell a Mars bar for 20p if you've produced it, because you'll be making a loss on it. Same with even if you made it at 40p, you'd only be able to supply 2 Mars bars, because it's not going to be worth your while to produce it, because you'll just be making a loss. Now this is the important part. So what's the point of where supply meets demand, and what's it called? Equilibrium. It's this line here. So you've got your demand going down and your supply going up. The most important part is equilibrium. Now that's the balancing point. That's the point where supply and demand meet. So for this example, you could sell 3 Mars baths for 60p. Now that means the demand for the products will still be relatively high, but also the supply will be able to get there. It would be a positive for the business and also a positive for the consumer. So that's how a price is basically negotiated and shown. It would be easier to show this in the class, but I thought this would be a good example to show you. So what are the things that actually influence supply? The availability of raw materials and labour. So if you want to make a product, you need to have stable materials, and you also need to be able to have someone to build it for you. The logistics of how you move it to a product from a place to place. So for example, in a Mars bar, it could be getting cocoa beans to actually make the chocolate. The ability to produce it profitably as well, and the competition for raw materials, and the government support. Things which influence demand is the affordability and also competition which is there. So basically other versions of Mars bars, maybe from Lidl or Tesco Value. Again, availability of substitutes. Can you get a different type of Mars bar or a different type of chocolate which does the same thing? The levels of gross domestic product. Now all that means is basically how much is being produced within that country. So basically, is it in recession or growth? Is it producing those things? Okay, this is something which we'll talk about briefly, but we won't actually talk about it in any kind of detail in the assignment, but it's worth you knowing anyway. It's basically supply and demand influences the price on goods. However, not all goods are influenced on price alone. There is something which causes this, and this is elasticity. Now, an inelastic product is something which generally the price changes of a product, but the demand doesn't change. So basically with cigarettes and petrol, those are usually either addictions or needs. You can change the price all you want, but it's not going to change the demand. People still need to put petrol in their car. And there's no real, with petrol as well, at the moment there's still no real substitute. You can get electric cars, but really they're not the same. I would say with cigarettes, so electronic cigarettes have actually kind of taken it away, so there are less people smoking now. That's something, but in reality as well, people will still smoke, and it's still a need. You can put the prices up of petrol and cigarettes, and people will still buy those products. Now, elastic products, which are affected by changes in price. Now, this could be anything, like a cup of coffee. There is a ceiling, okay? People will only pay so much for a cup of coffee. Same with a biro, because there are substitutes. So, for example, a biro, if the price went up of that, I could use a pencil, I could use a fountain pen. A cup of coffee went up, I could go and buy a cup of tea. I could go and look for an alternate to that. There is a substitute. That basically means you can get something, and you have to be mindful of the price that you charge. The Mars bar, again, you have to be mindful of the price you charge for that product. If you look forward, so that influences the level that you can actually put the price of the product at. Okay, that's a very, very brief, basic overview of economics for your level 3 business course. It's only brief, it's only basic, but it should give you some understanding of what is needed and what actually happens.